Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. When a grown woman leaves her car, purse, and phone behind in a locked house, and nobody hears from her for days, someone has to ask, is she missing or is she gone? On June 17th, 2025, the Roanoke Police Department responded to a residence on Downing Street, NW for a welfare check. The caller was Linda Martin, a woman in her 60s, calm and focused. She hadn't heard from her daughter, Meagan Martin, in nearly 3 days. "It's not like her," Linda had said. "She never disappears like this, not without telling someone." The house was a standard one-story ranch home in a quiet working-class neighborhood. Meagan's white Nissan sedan was parked neatly in the driveway, coated in a film of yellow-gray dust. Mail was visibly piling up in the box. Lights inside the home were off, curtains drawn. Officers knocked, no response. Checked all entry points. No damage, no sign of forced entry. With no visible threat or evidence of a crime, they had no legal authority to enter. But that changed the following day. June 18th, 2:05 p.m. One of Meagan's closest friends arrived at the property to check for herself. Through a narrow vertical pane next to the front door, she noticed something dark on the wall inside the hallway. Not dirt, not paint. She backed away and called 911, reporting a possible bloodstain. She also mentioned that a large comforter, recognizably Meagan's, was lying balled up beside the back HVAC unit, soaked through. This time, officers responded with urgency. With that tip and fresh probable cause, a warrant was quickly secured. By 4:50 p.m., they entered the residence. The home wasn't in disarray. There was no shattered glass, no overturned furniture, but it was too clean. The kitchen counters glistened. The floors smelled faintly of bleach. The bed was stripped. The laundry hamper was empty. For investigators familiar with domestic crime scenes, it triggered a familiar unease. From the hallway to the back door, investigators detected faint brown-red smears across the wall at thigh height. They weren't obvious to the naked eye under standard lighting, but luminol lit up a story, a 12-foot trail of swipe marks ending at the rear door frame. On the tile floor in the master bedroom, partial shoe impressions were found, men's size 11. One bloody outline, only half preserved, pointed outward from the foot of the bed. There were no signs of a struggle in the traditional sense. No broken lamps, no shattered objects. But a trained forensic eye noted several abnormalities. A single long strand of hair twisted around the bottom hinge of the headboard. The wall behind the bed showed impact microfractures, suggesting a forceful blow nearby. A bedside lamp had been unplugged and tucked behind the dresser. At 5:32 p.m., a cadaver dog was brought in. Within moments, it alerted at the backyard HVAC unit, where the comforter had been spotted. Another alert came near the far back corner of the lot, adjacent to a retaining wall. The soil there appeared freshly turned, though someone had made an effort to conceal it with mulch and a layer of leaves. By 6:10 p.m., investigators began carefully excavating the disturbed area. At 6:43 p.m., approximately 14 inches below the surface, they found the remains of a female, wrapped in bed linens, with a weighted object placed over the torso. The body was partially decomposed, consistent with exposure to summer temperatures and moisture. Preliminary ID came from a distinct wrist tattoo, confirmed by the mother on site. The body was transported to the Roanoke County Medical Examiner's office under sealed chain of custody protocol. Forensic Angle, Chapter 1, Focus, Scene Reconstruction, and Cadaver Recovery. The immediate forensic priority was scene mapping. Blood pattern analysis revealed multiple contact transfer points: the base of the bed frame, the door trim, the hallway's right side wall, and the latch area of the back door. All traces tested presumptive, positive for human blood. DNA analysis would later confirm it belonged to Meagan Martin. A set of tire impressions was lifted from the dirt path leading from the backyard to a nearby alley. They matched off-road treads consistent with a pickup truck. Investigators also noted minor impressions in the soft ground. Knee prints, suggesting someone crouched during the burial. In the bedroom, a damp hand towel recovered from a lower cabinet bore traces of diluted blood and bleach. A pair of yellow latex gloves found behind the washing machine were collected and sent for latent print testing. Fibers consistent with the comforter outside were discovered in the washer filter, along with two small wood fragments later determined to be from the backyard fence gate. In the trash bin, technicians located a receipt for a gas station purchase dated June 15th at 3:17 a.m., nearly 24 hours after Meagan's phone had last been active. Her phone, found in the kitchen near a charging cord, had not been used since 10:41 p.m. on June 14th. It was locked. No forced access, no recent messages. Investigators obtained a data extraction warrant. GPS ping logs confirmed the phone had remained inside the house from June 14th until its seizure. Detectives' internal report, excerpt. The scene was almost too neat. The kind of neat you get when someone isn't cleaning for themselves. They're cleaning for us. Back at headquarters, Roanoke PD officially reclassified the case as a homicide. The following day, digital analysis of nearby cell tower activity revealed that a device belonging to Joshua Presley, age 45, had been connected to Meagan's home router on the night of June 14th, specifically between 8:52 p.m. and 2:25 a.m. This man hadn't been seen at the property since, but his phone had, and so had his truck. On June 19th, investigators received external surveillance footage from a neighbor's Nest system. Though limited in angle and resolution, the recording from June 15th at 2:12 a.m. showed a figure exiting Meagan's back door, carrying what appeared to be heavy fabric over one shoulder. The person moved slowly, deliberately. The footage did not capture a return trip. It was enough. Roanoke PD issued a "Be on the lookout" notice for Joshua Presley and his vehicle. By June 21st, 2025, the Meagan Martin case was already moving past theory. What started with a welfare check had transitioned into a homicide file supported by trace evidence, digital signals, and forensic recovery of the victim's remains. But Roanoke PD knew that solving the how of a murder doesn't mean much without establishing the why and who had motive. That work would begin by reconstructing Meagan's life before she vanished. The department's behavioral crimes analyst initiated a timeline audit. This step in any domestic homicide case is critical, not just to track the victim's movements, but to examine psychological indicators of coercion, surveillance, and escalation. In these cases where no forced entry or random element is present, investigators often focus on what they call prior condition, a term referring to any verifiable history of psychological dominance or controlling behavior. They started with her phone. Using Cellebrite UFID extraction, investigators accessed Meagan's full mobile history. Between June the 1st and June 14th, there were no search queries for trips, appointments, or vacation plans. Meagan's digital patterns were stable: bank logins every Monday, calls to her mother every 2 days, texts with a coworker named Tasha around 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. Nothing looked frantic, no blocked numbers, but her texts read like they'd been filtered. There were almost no outgoing texts between June 10 and June 14th. Instead, there were dozens of unsent drafts, notes saved in her phone, never delivered. One read, "If something happens, it's not an accident. Don't let anyone call it that." That entry was time-stamped June 12th, 11:18 p.m. The next step was reviewing her work history. Meagan was employed at a local in-home senior care agency. Her employer, Karen L., described her as punctual, private, and meticulous. She didn't talk much about home, but lately she'd been showing up early, staying late. She even asked to cover shifts she didn't need. Karen assumed Meagan was saving for something, possibly trying to move. That detail matched testimony from her cousin, who told detectives Meagan had recently begun transferring small amounts, $50, $75, into a new checking account she had opened at a separate bank. The account name was under her middle and maiden name. She had not shared this with anyone else. What did all of this suggest? A slow and private attempt to create distance. She wasn't planning to disappear. She was planning to separate safely. Financially first, physically second. Her email activity confirmed the same trajectory. On June 8th, Meagan had downloaded a lease termination form from the Virginia Department of Housing website. 2 days later, she emailed a women's shelter requesting information about safety resources for a friend. That shelter never heard back. Alongside Meagan's preparations, detectives focused on understanding her cohabitant's role. specifically how much influence had been exerted over her autonomy in the weeks leading up to her death. The house on Downing Street, NW, had Wi-Fi logs maintained through a consumer-grade Xfinity router. Internal access logs revealed that Meagan's phone had connected every day between 5:30 a.m. and midnight, except one. On June 11th, her device disconnected for nearly 11 hours. During that window, no other known devices connected to the router. But there was a pairing request from an unfamiliar MAC address at 3:12 p.m. that day. The source was never matched to any phone Meagan owned. This would later be linked to a temporary device used to download surveillance footage from a Nest camera inside the home, one that had been removed prior to police entry. Investigators interviewed former roommates of Meagan's ex-boyfriend. Two individuals, dating back to 2019 and 2021 respectively, reported eerily similar behavior: confiscation of spare keys, control over bank access, and manipulation of contact lists. One even recalled being asked to delete a photo from her social media because it showed a bruise. No criminal charges had been filed in those cases. No protective orders issued. But patterns matter. Detective Cheryl Gaines entered a private observation in her case notes. This wasn't rage, it was management. Every single detail of her life was being monitored, calculated, and controlled. And she was finally making quiet moves to get out. That's usually when it happens. During a canvass of Meagan Street, neighbors recalled seeing her less frequently in the weeks before June 14th. A local UPS driver, who often made deliveries to that block, said she usually waved. But around June 12th, he noticed the blinds were drawn all day. On June 13th, Meagan was seen outside only once, carrying trash out. No one reported seeing her again after that. Back inside the home, forensic specialists uncovered a small notebook hidden in a plastic bin in the laundry room. The pages were sparse, but a few entries stood out. Thursday 11th, he didn't go to work, stayed in all day. Friday, asked if I was texting someone. He checked my call log. Have to wait until I get my next check to buy a burner phone. These weren't diary entries. They were documentation, evidence of psychological confinement, financial isolation, and attempts to regain control, slowly, deliberately. By the early morning of June 20th, 2025, Meagan Martin's body had been secured, cataloged, and delivered to the Roanoke County Medical Examiner's office. The forensic timeline was moving quickly, but with each new development, the pressure to construct a defensible homicide case intensified. In suspected domestic homicides, the autopsy doesn't just confirm death, it defines everything: cause, method, sequence, and time. This chapter focused on exactly that. The body arrived at 6:32 a.m. The external exam began less than an hour later. Meagan was discovered clothed only in a long t-shirt, consistent with sleepwear. The shirt was partially torn under the left arm. There were no undergarments. Dried blood was visible along the scalp line behind her right ear and pooled near the base of her neck. Insect activity indicated decomposition had begun approximately 36 to 48 hours prior, aligning with her last confirmed digital activity on the night of June 14th. The ME, Dr. Karen L. Halbrook, documented primary trauma: a closed head injury at the rear right parietal region, with visible contusion and associated swelling. A corresponding subdural hematoma was later confirmed via internal dissection. The object that caused the wound was likely cylindrical, approximately 2 to 3 inches in diameter. No skull fracture. However, the impact was forceful enough to result in brain hemorrhaging. Bruising along the mandible, along with petechial hemorrhaging in both eyes, suggested additional trauma consistent with asphyxia, likely manual, possibly positional. It was unclear whether the blunt force trauma preceded the airway restriction or occurred concurrently. What was clear: the cause of death was classified as homicide by blunt force head trauma with contributory mechanical asphyxia. There were no defensive wounds, no fractured fingers, no bruising along the arms that would indicate a prolonged struggle. Her fingernails were intact, with only one showing a microfracture and dark residue beneath. That sample was preserved and submitted for DNA testing. Toxicology screening revealed no presence of alcohol, sedatives, or opioids. No evidence of overdose, incapacitation, or drug-facilitated assault. Her system was clear. She was awake, aware, and likely ambulatory at the time of the attack. Forensics also analyzed the material used to wrap her body, a comforter and flat sheet, both matching the missing set from her bedroom. The interior folds contained trace amounts of urine and blood, suggesting that death occurred on the bedding prior to concealment. Particles of dried grass and fragments of pine mulch, consistent with her backyard soil composition, were embedded in the outer layer. This confirmed that the body was wrapped before being dragged outdoors. While the ME concluded her report, investigators processed the second major forensic angle, the timeline confirmation. Roanoke PD's digital forensics team matched 3 data points. Meagan's phone disconnected from Wi-Fi at 10:51 p.m. on June 14th. Her banking app was last accessed at 10:41 p.m., with no further logins or biometric pings. A neighbor's Nest camera, partially facing the rear alley, recorded movement at 2:12 a.m. on June 15th, showing a figure leaving her back door, carrying a large object. By triangulating these events, the estimated time of death was narrowed between 10:55 p.m. and 1:45 a.m. Based on decomposition, this was further supported by entomology analysis of larvae collected from the burial site. One vital discovery was a partial transfer smear found on the inner layer of the comforter, shaped like the outline of a hand. Using Blue Star forensic photography and subsequent chemical enhancement, latent ridge detail was lifted from the dried blood. Though not enough for a full print match, the pattern confirmed handling occurred post-mortem during the wrapping process. Trace evidence found under Meagan's fingernail, dark epithelial tissue and fiber fragments, was submitted to the Virginia Department of Forensic Science for comparative analysis. It would take days to process, but early reports indicated the presence of male DNA. Meanwhile, further scene processing turned up one critical anomaly, a small rubber doorstop wedged beneath the interior bedroom door. This appeared to have been used to prevent movement or forced entry into the room from outside. Investigators speculated Meagan may have been trying to restrict someone's access to the bedroom, a defensive tactic observed in prior abuse-related homicides. The timing of this detail was significant. If Meagan attempted to block the door before the fatal altercation, it suggested she anticipated a threat. Detective Cheryl Gaines made the following notation: no drugs, no defense wounds, just clean, fast trauma, not panic, execution. As the autopsy report was finalized, the team updated their case matrix. Timeline was secure. Physical evidence matched interior scene reconstruction. Biologicals were consistent with death inside the home, followed by concealment. While no murder weapon had yet been recovered, the wound geometry suggested something domestic: a flashlight, a curtain rod, a small bat, something not out of place in a household. The victim's body told a full, consistent story, but it was silent on one final point: intent. That would need to come from digital evidence, eyewitness corroboration, and, if possible, a statement from the person last known to be in that house with Meagan Martin. By the afternoon of June 21st, 2025, investigators had secured a crime scene, recovered a body, confirmed cause of death, and narrowed a forensic timeline. What they lacked was an account of what happened in the hours after Meagan Martin's final digital trace and where the person responsible had gone. Physical evidence established the crime, but a conviction requires connection. That meant reconstructing movement, not just behavior. Digital forensic analysts initiated a cell tower triangulation sequence based on a known device tied to Joshua Presley. His phone, a Samsung S21, was linked to Meagan's Wi-Fi until approximately 10:51 p.m. on June 14th. It remained inactive until it reconnected to a tower near Pulaski County shortly after 2:30 a.m. on June 15th. A second ping followed at 3:17 a.m., placing the device near a convenience store and fueling station located off Route 11. Transaction data from that gas station confirmed a $24.10 debit purchase, 2 drinks, and fuel, charged to a card ending in 2004, which financial records connected directly to Presley. Surveillance footage from the store, archived in 1080p resolution, showed a silver Dodge Ram arriving at 3:13 a.m., pulling into Pump 5. A single male exited the driver's side wearing a hooded sweatshirt and gloves. While the hood obscured most facial features, gait analysis later confirmed a slight right leg favoring, a physical characteristic consistent with Presley's 2019 orthopedic evaluation following a construction injury. Footage also captured a partial Virginia plate, XPH1. Minutes later, the truck exited southbound. Law enforcement issued a regional BOLO alert for the Dodge Ram at 4:12 a.m., while the technical team shifted their attention to license plate recognition systems across the I-81 corridor. At 3:54 a.m., an automatic plate reader near exit 98 logged XPH295 moving south. Another hit followed in Wytheville at 5:08 a.m. The path was linear, rural, and deliberate, avoiding main interstates and bypassing metro areas. The vehicle moved steadily away from Roanoke. Location behavior indicated a goal: create distance before daylight and avoid re-entry into any identifiable network. The ALPR trail eventually led investigators to a rest stop outside Rural Retreat, where a Department of Transportation camera logged the same truck at 5:47 a.m. The footage this time showed a dent on the rear quarter panel, visually matched to an earlier wellness visit captured on a Roanoke officer's body cam at Meagan's address 2 months prior. Same vehicle, same damage. While Presley's phone had been manually disabled for a portion of this time, it wasn't fully wiped. After being powered off for nearly 6 hours, the device reactivated at 6:35 a.m. and resumed tower communication near Pulaski. That placed it less than 40 minutes before Meagan's mother initiated a welfare check with Roanoke PD. The suspect had already begun moving into a lower visibility zone by the time officers knocked on the door. Forensics from the gas station's footage added to this chain of custody. Zoom analysis enhanced the tag, confirmed make and model, and provided video evidence of a solo driver, the same individual captured from behind exiting the rear of Meagan's home at 2:12 a.m. on June 15th, based on neighbor surveillance. No other subjects appeared on camera. No other routes showed overlapping cell pings with Presley's device ID. By 8:01 a.m. on June 21st, Roanoke PD had filed for and received an arrest warrant for Joshua Presley on suspicion of second-degree murder. A targeted search was initiated in Pulaski County, focused on property belonging to a relative. Land records showed Presley's cousin owned a home just off Wilderness Road. That location had been flagged earlier by a rural ALPR hit on the same vehicle at 7:22 a.m. the day before. Officers made entry with support from Pulaski County Sheriff's Office. Presley was located in the basement, alert, alone, and cooperative. No weapons were recovered on his person. He did not resist. He declined to answer questions and was transported to Roanoke for holding. The vehicle, a silver Dodge Ram, was impounded and processed. A search of the truck uncovered a long-handled flashlight with dried brown-red residue on the handle, a pair of latex gloves stuffed into a compartment behind the passenger seat, and a shovel in the bed with moist soil still present on the blade. All items were tagged, sealed, and submitted for expedited trace analysis. Presumptive blood tests conducted within hours returned positive results for human blood on the flashlight and one glove interior. DNA matching was pending. The truck's interior was visually clean. However, swab samples from the steering wheel, gear shift, and door latch yielded epithelial cell mixtures, sufficient to compare against both Meagan's and Presley's profiles. Swabs from the bedliner area also revealed trace fibers consistent with the comforter found at the burial site behind Meagan's home. The investigative team had no recorded testimony yet, but they had constructed a seamless trail. From the last Wi-Fi ping inside the Downing Street residence, to the vehicle's fuel purchase, to a full ALPR route confirmation, and now to forensic trace evidence recovered from the truck itself. It was no longer just a matter of presence. It was association, movement, behavior, concealment, and recovery. What remained was to test the reaction when the evidence was laid out in front of the suspect. By the morning of June 22, 2025, Joshua Presley had been in custody for just under 18 hours. He hadn't asked for a lawyer. He hadn't said much of anything. Roanoke detectives waited for the green light from the district attorney's office before initiating a formal interview under Miranda protocol. The forensic case was solidifying, but investigators knew that juries don't just respond to data, they respond to pattern, motive, and character. They needed to know, would Presley crack, or would he try to write it out? The interview took place in interview room 2A at Roanoke City Jail. It was a neutral space, clean, sparse, no recording lights visible. Presley was informed of his rights. He waived counsel, signed the waiver form, and acknowledged the session was being recorded. He remained expressionless. His posture was controlled, hands folded, minimal fidgeting. His responses were short, not evasive, but practiced. Detective Cheryl Gaines led the session. She began not with accusations, but with timeline questions, where he had been the week of June 10th. Presley claimed he had been between jobs, mostly staying with family. He didn't deny being at Meagan's house on June 14th. He didn't confirm it either. He said they hadn't been talking much. When asked why his phone pinged from her address between 10:30 p.m. and 2 a.m., he paused for the first time. Then, probably left it there. The next shift in tone came when shown the footage from the Pulaski gas station. Presley looked at the screen, said nothing. No denial, just silence. When pressed about the vehicle seen in the video, his vehicle, confirmed by partial plate and rear dent, he gave the most elaborate response of the entire interview. A lot of trucks look like that, but the turning point wasn't the video. It was the flashlight. Detectives placed a still image on the table. The black metal casing, blood-stained handle, recovered from the bed of his truck. Presley didn't touch the image. He didn't blink, but his hands tightened, briefly, then relaxed. "Never seen it," he said. That statement was logged. Forensic processing had already confirmed the blood on the flashlight belonged to Meagan Martin. The gloves recovered from the truck carried both Presley's DNA and epithelial cells consistent with the sample found beneath Meagan's fingernail. At that point, the science spoke louder than words. Still, investigators gave him space. They asked open-ended questions about the relationship, about why Meagan had recently tried to change her bank, why she hadn't answered calls, why she had been researching housing assistance. Presley deflected. "People get distant," he said. "That's not illegal." The interview ended after 42 minutes. No confession, no panic, no outburst. Just enough detachment to suggest self-preservation and enough awareness to avoid perjury. Investigators didn't need him to confess, but they documented everything: the posture, the pauses, the shift in tone when evidence was introduced. Back in the squad room, the discussion wasn't about whether he was guilty. It was about how to present the facts so that a jury could see what Presley wouldn't say. Control wasn't just a pattern, it was a process. And for Meagan, that process had ended in silence. On June 22, 2025, at precisely 11:08 a.m., the Commonwealth's attorney filed formal charges against Joshua Robert Presley. The charge, second-degree murder in the death of Meagan Martin. The filing was supported by a consolidated evidence package compiled over 6 days. An unusually swift turnaround, but warranted given the volume and consistency of forensic data. The state was ready to move. Presley remained silent. The case transitioned into legal phase with all procedural safeguards intact. Presley had been Mirandized. He waived counsel initially, but following the preliminary interview, a defense attorney was appointed. Bail was denied at arraignment. The presiding judge cited risk of flight, digital manipulation of the scene, and community safety. From a prosecution standpoint, the file was clean. Chain of custody logs on every major item, flashlight, gloves, vehicle samples, were intact and time-stamped. Biological materials had returned lab confirmations. Blood on the flashlight matched Meagan's DNA. Fibers inside the gloves included epithelial trace consistent with her tissue sample. Luminol-positive transfer patterns matched her bedspread and the rear patio drag marks. The recovered comforter contained burial dirt and decomposition fluids aligned with forensic pathology estimates. All of this was detailed in the state's evidence summary, submitted under Rule 3A or 11 for pretrial discovery. Public disclosure began shortly after arraignment. News outlets picked up the case. Local coverage framed it as a domestic violence tragedy. Headlines focused on silence. Not just Meagan's, but the system's. Reports noted she had no active restraining order, no previous complaints on file, but private notes recovered from her phone and a counseling app showed she had been preparing to leave. That preparation was not complete. The timing was not in her favor. Community reaction was swift. Local shelters reported a spike in calls within 72 hours of the story breaking. One domestic violence advocate, speaking off camera, said this case was a mirror too many women recognized. Roanoke PD, in an internal review, acknowledged the delay between the welfare call and the initial search. No misconduct occurred, but it raised procedural questions about thresholds for forced entry in missing persons cases with known domestic tension. In response, the department initiated a working group to review its welfare check protocol. The change was not legislative, it was cultural, and culture takes longer. Presley's legal team issued a standard public statement. He denied all allegations. The statement made no reference to the forensic evidence. That decision was expected. At this point in proceedings, most defense strategies involve challenging admissibility, not substance. But with no alternate theory of death and no indication of third-party involvement, the burden shifted to discrediting the investigative process. That would be difficult. By June 23rd, the state had filed its preliminary witness list. Forensic pathologist Dr. Karen Hallbrook, lead crime scene techs, digital forensic analysts, Roanoke PD's investigative team. The list also included a neighbor who saw movement in Meagan's yard at 2 a.m. and a gas station clerk who reviewed surveillance footage. Each individual filled a gap. No piece stood alone, but all pointed in the same direction. That was the strength of the case. Consistency, not confession. Behind the scenes, the district attorney's office coordinated with victim advocacy liaisons to keep Meagan's family informed. They were briefed in person on every major development. They didn't request to speak publicly, and no pressure was applied. They had already endured too much. In situations like this, dignity becomes a quiet form of justice. By June 24, 2025, the case against Joshua Presley had entered its most technical and fragile phase, pre-trial discovery conflict. With physical evidence already logged and public charges filed, both sides moved into full legal posture. This is often the part of a homicide case where momentum slows and strategy begins. Presley's defense team, led by a court-appointed attorney with prior experience in high-profile felony cases, submitted their first motion under Virginia's Rules of Criminal Procedure, a motion to compel disclosure, aimed at obtaining every internal memo, text analysis, forensic process log, and chain of custody report used in the Commonwealth's case. This wasn't unexpected. It's a standard move designed not only to prepare defense argumentation, but also to identify procedural cracks. The prosecution responded within 48 hours, attaching lab reports, ALPR timestamps, full autopsy findings, cell tower triangulation data, and notes from the interrogation. They withheld nothing critical. Still, the defense challenged methodology, not content. Specifically, they focused on three angles: the reliability of luminol testing at the bedroom threshold, potential contamination of the flashlight found in Presley's vehicle, and what they described as unvalidated trace association between the victim's epithelial cells and glove fibers. Their intent was clear. They weren't building an alternate theory. They were sowing uncertainty about the strength of the original one. In response, the Commonwealth called in independent verification. The flashlight underwent second-phase DNA amplification using STR, short tandem repeat testing. The resulting allelic profile matched Meagan Martin's DNA at 15 of 15 core loci, eliminating any probability of error beyond 1 in 1.2 billion. This level of match made the defense's contamination argument statistically negligible. The gloves were next. One contained a partial fingerprint on the inner cuff, lifted during reprocessing, overlooked in the original round due to insufficient powder contrast. That print matched Presley's right index finger. There was no longer a reasonable pathway to claim those gloves had been planted, transferred, or left without his knowledge. Meanwhile, the defense submitted a motion to exclude the Nest camera footage from the neighbor's home, citing inadequate angle and poor resolution. Technically, the figure could not be ID'd facially, but the prosecution wasn't using the footage for identification. It was timeline reinforcement. The timestamp, 2:12 a.m. on June 15th, fit perfectly within the mobile phone data, vehicle departure path, and body discovery timeline. The camera wasn't a primary piece of evidence, it was corroborative. Legally, that distinction matters. A hearing was set for July 1st to address evidentiary admissibility. Leading up to it, prosecutors prepped expert witnesses from digital forensics, forensic pathology, and law enforcement data mapping. Each expert was chosen not just for technical credentials, but for clarity. Juries don't respond to jargon. They respond to clear explanation of how and why evidence fits into a case narrative. The court also assigned a trial date, September 5, 2025, with jury selection scheduled for the week prior. Behind the scenes, the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office reviewed the potential risk of overcharging. While the case had strong support for second-degree murder, it did not yet meet the burden for first-degree. There was no documented premeditation, no recovered note, no express threat. The killing appeared sudden, likely impulsive, but still fatal and avoidable. Based on the current file, the charge level remained. Throughout these developments, the family of Meagan Martin remained out of public view. Their presence was felt through victims' advocacy updates, but they requested no press contact. Their trust remained with the system, something that, in many cases like this, has to be earned again. When the Commonwealth of Virginia brought second-degree murder charges against Joshua Robert Presley, the prosecution wasn't trying to tell a complicated story. It was a case built on direct evidence, persistent investigative work, and a single undeniable truth. Meagan Martin was dead, and her body had been found just feet from the home she once shared with the man now sitting at the defense table. Court proceedings began in March 2024, less than 9 months after Meagan's disappearance. The timeline was considered fast, but the evidence was in order, and the prosecution moved swiftly. Prosecutor Amanda Rayburn opened by showing the jury a photograph of Meagan's body, discovered June 16, 2025, under a worn tarp behind the residence on Shady Grove Road. Decomposition had already set in. The cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. The object? Unconfirmed. But the coroner testified with clarity. There was no chance of survival. The state laid out its case in chronological structure, measured, clinical, cell tower pings, time-stamped surveillance showing Presley buying bleach in garbage bags from a nearby hardware store on June 15th. Receipts confirmed the purchases. That same night, a neighbor's Ring camera picked up muffled arguing around 11:42 p.m. The audio was analyzed and enhanced. A female voice shouted, "Don't touch me!" Presley's voice followed. Meagan's disappearance was reported less than 36 hours later by a concerned friend. When officers first questioned Presley, his tone was flat, unemotional. "She left," he said. "She just walked out." But she didn't take her phone, or her keys, or her shoes. The prosecution highlighted one of the strongest pieces of forensic evidence. Blood traces found in the trunk of Presley's Dodge Charger matched Meagan's DNA. It wasn't just a drop or two. It was enough to indicate forceful bleeding. A forensic pathologist explained, the level of saturation suggested the victim was either incapacitated or deceased when placed in the trunk. Then came the text messages, retrieved from a deleted folder in Presley's phone. Dozens of threatening messages from him to Meagan, months before her death. "You don't get to walk away like that," one read. "You'll pay for humiliating me." These were not isolated. They showed a pattern: jealousy, coercion, control. The court listened in silence. Presley's defense team attempted a different route. They leaned heavily on character witnesses, most of whom gave vague or strained support. One neighbor claimed Presley was a good guy under pressure. Another testified that Meagan had once yelled at him during a heated argument. But these statements collapsed quickly under cross-examination. The defense argued there was no video showing the murder, no confirmed murder weapon, and no eyewitness. "Reasonable doubt exists," his attorney said. "You cannot convict a man for being flawed." But the jury didn't need cinematic footage to decide. The sum of circumstantial evidence told a narrative stronger than denial. Presley's behavior after Meagan vanished, his failure to report her missing, his inconsistent alibis, his documented hostility, all reinforced guilt. On March 28, 2024, after 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The sentencing phase brought one final wave of reality. Meagan's sister read a victim impact statement, her voice breaking but resolute. "My sister was not just a victim," she said. "She was a mother, a daughter, a fighter. She tried to leave, and that cost her everything. The judge delivered a sentence of 50 years in prison, citing the cold and calculated attempt to conceal the body and the total lack of remorse demonstrated. As Presley was led away, he showed no visible reaction. No tears, no final words, just a blank stare at the floor. The courtroom emptied slowly. Reporters packed up equipment. Family members exhaled for the first time in months. Closure, if it could be called that, didn't come in the form of justice served. It came from the silence that followed. Finally, true crime stories are never just about the crime. They're about the people left behind, about what it means to miss warning signs or to feel helpless watching someone spiral. In this case, it was about a woman trying to rebuild her life quietly and being cut down when she was almost free. What makes this case stand out isn't its brutality, it's how ordinary the pattern was. Domestic control, coercion, and finally, fatal violence. There were no elaborate schemes or wild twists, just silence, denial, and an ending that didn't need to happen. And that's where these stories matter, not in their shock value, but in what they leave with us. If even one person watches this and recognizes something in their own life or in someone they love and acts before it's too late, then Meagan's story, though cruelly ended, still has purpose. If there's one thing I've learned from telling this story, it's that silence can be deadly. As someone who's walked through these dark moments with victims, families, and the evidence left behind, I've seen how control hides in plain sight. Meagan didn't get justice in life, but in death her story speaks loudly. If this video reached you, touched you, or made you reflect, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Or tell me why it did or didn't connect with you. I read everyone. And if you believe stories like this matter, hit subscribe and stay with me. There's more we need to uncover together.